Hey everybody. So I'm ready to share another piece of the puzzle here. This particular figure, Philo of Alexandria, who was born 20 BCE and died 50 CE. I want you to remember that because those dates are going to be important when we take a look at some other texts here in just a bit. So this guy plays an important role in uncovering pieces of the puzzle for what I've been doing as far as my research goes. And he falls kind of in line with Plato and some of these other philosophers, but he adds something very specific to it that I want to show you guys here in just a bit. All of these philosophers, they talk about the Logos, or they talk about this heavenly man. If you are a Christian and you've been following the Catholic Church's interpretation, or the mainstream Christianity's interpretation of the Bible and creation, I want to give you what the ancient philosophers, their take on it. It's slightly different than what you have heard as far as mainstream goes. When we think about the creation of Adam and Eve, everybody always thinks of the two separate people. They always think of Adam and Eve as two people, and they always think of them in this garden with the tree of knowledge, and they get this visual of two people running around naked in a garden. Well, this is not actually the way that Genesis is supposed to be described. And when you look at a lot of these ancient philosophers, you find this out. But it's it's kind of something that you have to contemplate for a little bit to kind of understand it, because what we're really talking about is we're talking about how man came into being. And when we think about this stuff, we kind of almost have to think about it as it's almost virtual, it's almost holographic, and it's kind of what we call emanation. So, what we start with at the very beginning, and I'm going to go ahead and Philo right here, let's just read about him. Philo used philosophical allegory to attempt to fuse and harmonize Greek philosophy with Jewish philosophy. His method followed practice of both Jewish exegesis and Stoic philosophy. His allegorical exegesis was important for several Christian church fathers, but he barely had any reception history with Judaism. He believed that literal interpretations of the Hebrew Bible would stifle humanity's view and perception of a God too complex and marvelous to be understood in literal human forms. So he had an idea that it's difficult to put your mind around this stuff. It takes a lot of contemplation, but with diagrams and images and things like this, we can put it together. Some scholars hold that his concept of the Logos as God's creative principle influenced early Christology. Other scholars, however, deny direct influence, but say that both Philo and early Christianity borrowed from a common source. Well, I think that they borrowed from Philo here, and I think we're going to see that. I think Philo borrowed from Plato, but he adds a twist that I haven't seen from Plato yet, probably because I haven't looked hard enough. But let's take a look here. So this is the Adam Cadman. What is the Adam Cadman? You see this diagram right here? If you guys are not familiar with it, this diagram, a lot of times you put the human body on top of it. These top three right here, they represent one hemisphere of the brain, the other hemisphere of the brain, and in the center we have the pineal gland, and this represents Kether. When things come into existence, come into creation, they start all the way up here, and then they emanate out and they create the body, which is the cosmos. Okay, so if we're thinking about this as a human body, which the way the ancients thought about it, the first thing that comes into existence is the pineal gland, and then it continues to emanate out. Just imagine star stuff coming out of a pocket of space. So the first image that's created is the pineal gland, and then we have this brain created, and then it moves down and create solar systems and so forth, and the solar systems might be represented as the spinal cord. The center thing that we have right here would be the sun in a solar system, but up here at the very top, this is what the Godhead is, and this is where it all emanates from. And beyond this point is the invisible. So, when we think about the Adam Kadmon, we think about the Adam Kadmon is basically another name for the first man. So when you think of the Adam that was created in the Bible, the first Adam that was created in the Bible, it is a misinterpretation that it is a terrestrial man. The first man that we see in all of these ancients that we're telling us about, from Plato to Philo to these other guys, that a lot of them, even Manly Hall, believe that they got their information from the ancient Egyptians. In fact, what they know and some of this stuff, to me, is just, I don't see how they could have come up with this stuff out of the blue. It's just, I mean, and I have all these tools to see what they're talking about, but to have come up with all this stuff out of the blue is just amazing. I mean, they were either connecting somehow consciously, or it was passed on from ancient Egypt, from Plato and so forth. So Adam Kadmon is the first representation. It's the first original man. And so we'll come down here and we'll take a look at some of these, and Philo is one of them. So we have Kabbalah, we have Zohar. So here's what they show you as an image of the Adam Kadmon right here. Adam Kadmon, primordial man, the first man. Now this is the Kabbalah view, but you got to remember that the Kabbalah view is just in line with things like Philo, Plato, some of these other guys, but it introduces the Jewish mysteries as well. So Adam Kadmon represented by the thorn of the first letter Yod, so that when you think of the divine name Yahweh, the four-letter tetragrammaton, the one on the very right, which just looks like a single quote, that's called the Yod, and that's represented as the Adam Kadmon. And what you normally see in the symbolism is you normally see that Yod inside of a triangle, because the triangle represents the area of the head. So if we move down a little bit down here to the Zohar, we can see closer related to the Philonic doctrine of the heavenly Adam is the Adam Kadmon. See, these are just different names for the same thing, the high man or the heavenly man of the Zohar, whose conception of the original man can be deduced from the following passages. The form of man is the image of everything that is above in heaven and below on earth, therefore did the holy ancient God select it for his own form. As with Philo, the Logos is the original image of man. So it's the original image of man, or the original man. So in the Zohar, the heavenly man is the embodiment of all divine manifestations. Let's move down to Philo here, because Philo is what we want to talk about. So the first to use the expression original man or heavenly man was Philo. So he was the first to use this expression. That's important. In whose view, as being born in the image of God, has no participation in any corruptible or earth-like essence, whereas the earthly man is made of loose material, the heavenly man, as the perfect image of the Logos, which we're going to take a look at here in just a second, is neither man nor woman. And the reason why it's neither man nor woman is because it's only a certain part of the body, which we'll see here, that can be found in both man or woman. But an incorporeal intelligence purely an idea, while the earthly man, who was created by God later, is the perceptible senses to the qualities. So he's the first one to come up with this term. Okay. Now let's take a look, because I found a document by Philo, the works of Philo on the creation. So if I scroll down, and this is the part that I think provides us really good information. Now I want you to remember that all this stuff that we see It all came from seeing these images in the cathedrals. They have never done me wrong yet. They've always given me the correct information. So here's the image that we see that created by Michelangelo. It's a brain. We see the Orion Nebula. The Orion Nebula is the brain. And so here is the image that Michelangelo provided us with his creation of Adam image. And you see that it is an image of a certain part of the body. So this would be neither male nor female. So now we're going to come down here, because we also can take a look at this logos that we were just mentioning. And if we take a look at the Jewish image, this is the unknown essence. The origin of the Jewish image may perhaps be traced to Hermes Pymander, the Egyptian logos, who appeared within a cloud of humid nature with a smoke escaping from it. And if we take a look at the Mayans, they say that the seed of creation represented by the smoke that comes out of the burning fire, which is referring to the Orion Nebula, which sits in the middle of the three hearthstones of creation. You can see how all the pieces of this puzzle just come together. But we need to get back to Philo here. And I want to find something that's going to confirm the image that we actually see in the cloud. This is really important. Now remember, he was born in 20 BCE and died in 50 CE, right? So then after all the other things, as been said before, Moses says that man was made in the image and likeness of God. And he says, well, for nothing that is born on earth is more resembling God than man. And let no one think that he is able to judge of this likeness from the characters of the body. For neither is God a being with the form of a man, nor is the human body like the form of God. But the resemblance is spoken of with reference to the most important part of the soul, namely the mind. For the mind, which exists in each individual, has been created after the likeness of that one mind which is in the universe as its primitive model, being in some sort of God, that body which carries it about and bears its image within it. In the same rank that governor occupies in the universal world, that same as it seems does the mind of man occupy in man. For it is invisible, though it sees everything itself, and it has an essence which is undiscernible, though it can discern the essences of all other things, and making for itself by art and sciences of all sorts roads leading in diverse directions, and all plain it traverses land and sea, investigating everything which is contained in either element. Now we come down here. It says, and also being itself involved in the revolution of planets and fixed stars. So it's saying that it controls the planets and fixed stars. The only thing that can do that would be something bigger than the planets and the fixed stars. And then down here at the bottom it says, but as is not every image that resembles its archetypal model, since many are unlike, Moses has shown this by adding to the words after his image the expression in his likeness, to prove that it means an accurate impression having a clear and evident resemblance in form. So what he said up here is that the archetypal image that is made in the image of God is the mind, and the image of the mind is the brain. And that's exactly what we see when we take a look at the Orion Nebula. And he's referring to the Logos. And the Logos that we know in the Judaism text and the ancient Egyptians and the Mayans was a cloud with a smoke coming out of the middle of it, which is exactly what the Orion Nebula is. So you see how all this gets put together by getting the mystical information that we see from Michelangelo. We can put this other stuff together as well. So this is Philo's view of God. This is just from another area of Wikipedia. Philo used the term logos to mean an intermediary or divine being or demiurge. Philo followed Platonic distinction between imperfect matter and perfect form, and therefore intermediary beings were necessary to bridge the enormous gap between God and the material world. The logos was the highest of these intermediary beings, and was called by Philo the firstborn of God. The firstborn of God, okay? The Logos, the firstborn of God. So, if we take a look at the first begotten right here in the Bible, the firstborn, the first begotten, we can see that Philo applies this word to the Logos as the archetypal and governing idea of creation. Similarly, in Colossians 1:15, we see that the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. These are just parallel verses. So now we have Christ representing the Logos. Christ represents the Logos, and it is the firstborn over all creation, which means that Christ represents the Orion Nebula. And it represents the archetype, the idea that we see, which is man. And then there came forth from that place the cloud of the great light, the living power, the mother of the holy. For this one, Adamus, is a light which radiated from the light. He is the eye of the light, for this is the first man. So, Christ and Adam are the same. They're the same being. They represent a collective unity of all of humanity. And interestingly, if we take a look inside this other area, inside the Bible Hub, we see Jesus sitting on top of the Orion Nebula right there, called Wisdom. So when we take a look at the Adam Cadmon, which is really a way of looking at it this way. Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He's the firstborn over all creation. This is the Logos, which is the image of man. It's neither male nor female, because the image of the mind, like Philo said. This triangular area that we see right here represents the pineal gland, and it represents Kether, and it represents the first point where things emanated from. Chokmah and Bina represent aspects of the Trinity which correspond to the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And then moving down the spinal cord of this great heavenly man, we have our solar system. But sitting at the top represents everything all together. So this is the complete representation of the human archetype. And it's also the Christ, and it's also the Adam Cadmon, and it's also the Logos, and it's also the heavenly man. And you can see that because all of the information I provided so far in these various texts tell us that. But Philo's telling us that but the resemblance is spoken of with reference to the most important part of the soul, namely the mind. So the archetype he's referring to here is the image of the mind. And that's important because it gives us a very specific part to focus in on. Now we understand why it's androgynous, whether it's not male nor female. And we also see the same thing in the Zohar, because the Zohar tells us that the heavenly man, which the stars and planets move around, is the image of, which is, and it's also called the divine chariot or the heavenly chariot. It's the image of a male and a female in one face, is what it says. And that brings us back to what we see when we take a look at the creation of Adam. We have Eve, and we have Adam all in one face that we see right here. So the Logos, the Christ, the heavenly Adam, what Philo's provided for us. Oh, and there's one more thing I wanted to show you. Remember, Philo was born in 50 BCE, right? We have Colossians giving us this verse right here. So I decided to check and see when Colossians was written. And it tells us it's widely believed that Paul's letter to the Colossians was written in 62 AD, so that would have been at least 12 years after Philo died. So that means that more than likely they borrowed this from Philo, because they clearly say here that the Christ, or the Son, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. And if we think of this, the firstborn over all creation, nebulas, they create everything. They create stars, they create planets. They would be the firstborn. But it's in the very center area of that trapezium, which emanates the invisible God. So when we think of this emanation, the only way I can help you understand the way this would work is if there is some kind of a vortex in the very center of the trapezium right here. The vortex leads to the invisible, to the spiritual realm, if you will. Some other form of reality, of whatever. Okay? And within that reality exists this an idea, a perfect idea. Now, to the Gnostics, and this is interesting, we should take a look at this real quick. Because this has some important terminology in it. The primeval, to the Gnosticism, primeval, proto-anthropos, Adam. Here's Adam again, right? So we have this aeon called autogenes, and it emits the true and perfect anthropos called Adamus. Now, here's the other one. The other version of this, where it says others say, this is the one that I like, the one that makes more sense to me based on what I've seen so far. There is a blessed and incorruptible, endless light in the power of Bethos. So we think of the incorruptible, endless, infinite light, right? And this is the Father of all things, who is invoked as the first man. So in the Gnostic texts, they look at the invisible God, the creator of everything, as the first man. Rather than seeing it as a God, they see it as the first man, the perfect, invisible, spiritual archetype of man. It is the same to the Gnostics as the invisible, unknowable Father, right? Who, with his ennoia, which is the light, I believe that means the light, emits the Son of Man, or Uteranthropos. So now we understand how Son of Man and Son of God are similar, because the Son of God and the Son of Man mean the same thing here, because if man is the invisible perfect archetype, and the firstborn over all creation is the visible image of the invisible God, and then the visible image of the invisible God is the same thing as the visible image of what we see as man. It's these perfect archetypes that exist in the invisible spiritual realm. And with that archetype or that plan or what have you, it's used and it emanates into reality, into physical reality. And the first thing that it creates is it creates this image or this archetype of man. And it's the very top. It's the firstborn over all creation. It is the Christ, and it is the intermediary between the physical world and the invisible spiritual realm. This is the real meaning of what the Christ is. It's a cosmic force. It's a cosmic thing. And it also represents a collective unity of all of humanity. the historical Jesus in the Bible, we can come up with whatever we want to on that. There's a lot of back and forth on that kind of thing. But based on all of the ancient philosophers, based on what we can actually see in the cosmos, we actually see it, and it's backed up. The geometry and everything that we see regarding it is the same geometry that we see as man, and that particular archetype coincides with what Philo was saying that the archetype was, which is the image of the mind. So I would trust that this area that we see right here represents the Christ, but it's deeper than that. We need to understand that it's much, much deeper than just saying God is over here or Christ is over there. We have to look at this and understand this is a symbol. It's a symbol that represents all of humanity together as one being or one archetype. This is the world soul, if you will. And this is also the mirror that is created on Earth, because Earth has the same imagery that we see in the Orion Nebula. Same thing that the Mayans and the Egyptians were showing us with their pyramids. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that on Philo. He gave us some good information regarding the mind. Guys, take care. I'll talk to you soon.